Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. And in the aftermath of the few days that we've been having, this feels particularly special. My name is Ahuna Palchowdhury. I'm a PhD student in the anthropology department, and I welcome you on behalf of the Saxena Center for the Study of Contemporary South Asia to the third and final event in our Spring Artist in Residence program. Having an artist in residence has turned our otherwise slightly clinical center office on Brook Street into a more inviting and intimate space. A tanpura might suddenly begin playing. A student will walk in for office hours holding a guitar. A red rug has been identified as a good one to sit and do riyaz on. A staff member will happily offer their offices to you for the day if you forget your keys.
Thank you.
And someone or the other will share their brown ID so that you can work in the building on weekends. And so I will share this too. When I was thinking through whether or not I would make a Me Too allegation a few years ago against an academic, not a musician, I was told that since I'd sung earlier on in the day, things weren't quite straightforward. To make things murkier, what I'd sung was a thumri, a form historically associated with the Shringar or erotic rasa and the courtesans of North India. The next time someone asks you to sing, please sing something classical and aren't advised, like a difficult taan or something. And so I gave that a go. Can I repeat that sentence? The next time someone asks you to sing, please sing something classical and aren't advised, like a difficult taan or something, so that people take you more seriously. And so, for a while, I tried fending drunken uncles off by switching genre. Every time one leaned in too close, I would let loose a hurtling sapat taan, a little bit like one would elbow someone on the Delhi metro. But I can't quite say I was entirely successful. I found solace, somewhat audaciously, in T.M. Krishna's description of how the great M.S. Subbulakshmi too was recommended an erotic detox, not by an aunt, but by her husband and likely the engineer of her professional and musical choices, T. Sadasivam. Krishna points out that after she officially married Sadasivam, MS's racier, curvier, more stylish taans, markers not only of her Devdasi antecedents, but also of a young woman who wore pants and acted in films and smoked cigarettes and fell in love, began to turn more structured, dwindled, and become eclipsed by the popular religiosity of Meera Bhajans and the Kanjivaram-clad demeanor of an ideal Brahmin housewife. MS absorbed and grew into these transformations, becoming eventually the hallmark of propriety and devotion that we love to laud and deify. But every now and then, Krishna argues, there would be a taan or a run in which an older, more original MS would appear. I quote, like a flash of lightning over the open seas. In what ways do the charges and intensities that comprise an artist become visible beyond their identities? Can a musical expression of the erotic, for instance, remain distinct or become unhinged from the social categories of caste or gender within which it is received? Here are two examples from my fieldwork in rural and urban West Bengal that make me wonder. The first is a somewhat mirror inversion of the MS story. A 6-year-old Brahmin boy called Riju, who was known in the village in which I worked as the child groom of a lower caste deity called Khandarani. Despite his parents' best efforts, Riju would become possessed by the ritual dhak or drum, make his way to the inner sanctum of Khandarani's shrine, and sing to her in seeming gibberish while fondling her form. To cure him, Riju's parents sent him to the neighboring town of Bishnupur to learn Indian classical music. In a recent interview with his guru, a senior member of the Bishnupur Gharana who I won't name, I was told that Riju was beginning to forget his infatuation with Khandarani and was singing well. Akar tane ekhono ekটু khoira bhab ache. He still has a bit of a lower caste twang when he sings taans in A. Or riyaj korle thik hoye jabe. If he does his riyaz, he'll be okay. My second example is from research I conducted at a music institute in Calcutta in the aftermath of its first Me Too allegation, where amidst other reactions, there were murmurs of panic that the era of Indian classical music had now passed, since it could no longer be taught like it ought to. This is not the sort of music you can teach in a factory, I was told by a guru. It's an emotional transmission, sina basina, chest to chest. These students will not learn anything if they can't fully trust their gurus. The students in response argued that music was taught all over the world in many different ways, and people seemed to be learning just fine. Jazz, too, was an improvisational form. In preparation for a musical sit-in they conducted in protest, students put up posters that read, "Gurus, check your privilege." And next to it, cutouts of an article from the Indian Express by T.M. Krishna titled "Lift the Veil on the Parampara, the Guru-Shishya structure is inherently prone to abuse." I was part of this sit-in, of course, and helped put up these posters, but I left the protest with some doubt. Here's an excerpt from my field notes that evening. Excuse my language. What the fuck is check your privilege? I think it's a bit of a cop-out. T.M. Krishna is not hitting on his students because he's remembering to control himself. He isn't doing it because that's not what he thinks music is, or what he thinks it is to teach and learn. And I know this because I have heard him sing. This doesn't at all mean that the best singers are free of vices. I grew up on a music campus around some of the greatest Indian classical musicians, and I knew well before I hit puberty who never to be alone in a room with. But there's a way in which an artist's politics, or lack thereof, become utterly transparent in their work. What is it about an aesthetic form that allows for that to happen? Maybe it's what TMK says of MS, that a rag has the capacity to abstract an artist's self and make it real. And in doing so, gift us a moment of self-realization as well. We have now all heard you sing, TMK. Thank you on all of our behalf for the conviction that you have gifted us in what you stand for. But now that you are an insider to our residents, I have one last question. Is it or is it not of stake that all three of the Saxena Center's artists in residence so far have been upper caste men? Or does it not matter, since their individual practices remain unbesmirched and are indeed shining examples of what it is to make political art? I ask this with no irony or accusation, but a more open-ended thought about what kind of distance from identity or representation aesthetic form has the capacity to take while still retaining and perhaps fulfilling its political goal. Thankfully, identity, representation, and aesthetics are three of the 4 keywords in the subtitle of your talk today. I will trust in what you say. Thank you.
Well, that is a tough act to follow. I will get you a question at some point of time, hopefully today. First of all, thank you very much for having me over the last 2 weeks at the Saxena Center. I think I leave on Monday. So it's, first of all, been wonderful to be here, to sing, to have conversations, and had many conversations, and to kind of also think about many other things related to the conversations we had and related to the work that I'm doing. So in a way, I've structured this talk slightly differently from how I usually would approach this subject. And I think it's got to do with my previous conversations and my concert and the many office hours I had and the chats I had. So probably enter the subject slightly differently than what I would usually. Whenever we discuss any form of marginalization, especially in the world of art, whether it is gender, caste, race, color, etc., the one thing that we unconsciously keep constant, and at least for a while beyond investigation, is the form itself. So if I discuss these words in the context of an art form, say my own art form, Carnatic music, I will talk about, okay, who's singing, who's listening, who's participating. That's about it. And there is this universal understanding somehow in this entire conversation that we all accept the form. That's a fascinating status quo that we're willing to accept. Right? There is no question of any of these being part of the idea of the form itself. Right? So it's a kind of a odd position to start from, but that's where we start from. And another thing is, with music, this becomes even harder. Because music is this one thing that its greatest strength and its greatest danger is the fact that it's not tangible. You can't hold it in your hand. It's literally comes and goes. In fact, music is most of the times just memory. Even when you're hearing a concert, every second is past, and what you're holding is memory. If you're seeing a painting, you can keep looking at it. A dancer is physically in front of you. A theatrical act is actually happening. So there is a very tactile connection that you make. Music very rarely has that. You see me, but the voice you don't see, the sound is gone. And this allows for it to escape a lot of questioning, as much as it makes it profoundly moving, and which is why every philosopher from time immemorial has talked about the arts, but said music is somehow placed separately, even among the arts. And I think that's the reason that it's not physical. But that also means that it escapes questioning of its form, of its integrity, of its sound. How much of this conversation is in the sound of a form? How much of the conversation of caste or gender is in the way I listen to it, the tonality of it, even the movements in it? We actually don't really know. Even when we investigate the past, for example, in the case of dance, we are able to see pictures, we are able to see some amount of narratives that give you a physical idea of how social transformations affected the form. In music, it doesn't exist. So it's only a purely sociological conversation of who was participating, who was being marginalized, who is not singing, who is listening. But how did it sound? Has the sound changed? This question is quite intriguing. And I think it's something very, very important for, as a practitioner, also for me to think about. Because the one thing that you learn is that what you think is a musical form is completely limited by time and space. And I kind of addressed it in my last talk. If the great composer Tyagaraja came back today and sang in front of me, I'm not sure I would like what he sang. Because the idea of sound, of music, has changed in the last 250 years. So what does it mean musically, in its sound, in its tonality, when I discuss words like representation, words like gender and caste? What does it mean to the form itself? It's something that I want to start off from and then maybe explore other things. One very linear and very obvious connection we make is with language, is with content. So we would say, of course, if there were people from diverse communities, the songs that are sung would have different social tonalities. You would sing about different things. You would think about different interactions. Yes, that's the obvious. But beyond that, will the word itself be pronounced differently? And if the word is pronounced differently, will the rag change? That is something we never wonder. Because every community, every social context, say a word differently. I'll give you an example, for example. In the goddess is named Kamakshi. You go anywhere in Tamil Nadu to any person who is not part of the Brahminical community, and they will say Kamachi. I will never say Kamachi when I sing a song. What happens if I sing Kamachi? Does the rag change? Does the chi do something to the movement of that raga at that point that the kshi does not do, or vice versa? So there is even the notion of representation or identity in that simple act of one small shift of a syllabic sound. even keeping aside the caste identity that comes from, just in sound. There's caste in sound. So it's fascinating that I will very naturally, in fact, very honestly, let me be honest, I will cringe if I was going to sing Kamachi. I'm being brutally honest here. Even with all this conversation, I won't be comfortable saying Chi. Why? It's the same. Is it the same goddess? Well, that's a fascinating question too. Is Kamakshi the same as Kamarchi? Are they two different goddesses? So maybe I want only one kind of goddess. I don't want to call the other goddess. Maybe I'm saying something far deeper than just the sound of Chi and Chi. So it's very interesting that we don't even explore this idea. So unconsciously, we expect everybody to fall in line. We even expect those that we hopefully are welcoming into the room to fall in line to this idea. This idea, everybody has to fall in line and goes unquestioned. But then this raises a very fundamental artistic question that I want to go back to. Because the one thing that any form of art seems to represent, or seems to be an emblem of, is the idea of freedom. Because in the experience of art, everybody at that moment says there is a form of liberation. And there is a bit of an irony over here. Right? So, what is freedom? Freedom is some kind of, I could call an active energy that does not have bounds, that is coming together with an inner weave and not pressurized by any external forces. And if you go to the etymology of the word, it can go to Old German or Old Dutch, and it's somewhere connected to free will. There's another word that also says freedom is connected to peace. And that's probably the greatest irony. Because irony, how many of us as artists are really at peace, considering what we are doing. But then, what about the loss of it? And the loss of freedom can happen because of many reasons. It can be brainwashing, it can be conformism, it can be collective habit. So then this entire thing raises a question in me as a practicing artist, right? What am I singing? What am I really singing? If everything I'm singing is so internally governed in its sound by a certain context and identity, what am I singing? Am I free? Is my music free? Is a question that appears in my head. And it's very, very hard to answer that question. When I started singing music, I never asked any questions of this sort. I just sang. I didn't really care who was singing. I knew who was singing. I didn't care who was listening because I knew exactly who was listening. So everybody knew everybody else. And we were very, very comfortable with the Chis. There was no question of Chi ever appearing in the horizon, right? So the sound was also very clear. I'll give you an aside, a story. And it's, again, got to do with sound and imagery. I started working with my dear friend Perumal Murugan, the Tamil poet and writer, it's been almost a decade now. And when we first met, I said, I'm looking to see if we can collaborate and create new repertoire in Carnatic music. And we discussed it over many days and finally said, okay, let's work on this. And I said only two things to him. I said, I want, in terms of subject matter, I said, write on anything that you want to write about. And I said, also use the dialects and the versions of words that you would use. He said, okay. And we started this and I did a few songs. And then we came to one song. And I quote this example a lot because it's an interesting case of sound and imagery. So we were discussing about making a song on manual scavenging as a problem. And of course, we struggled with even writing the song. I mean, who are we to write the song? Should we write the song? Should I sing the song? All these debates. And finally, we came up with the song. And the first line is Nara Malam Allalama. The translation is, can we pick up stinking feces? Is the first line. So he composed a song. I composed the tune for it, and I was going to perform it for the first time, and Murugan was sitting next to me just before I got on stage. And Murugan suddenly looked at me and said, Murugan does not belong to the world of Carnatic music at all, in aesthetically, socially, in any manner. And suddenly looked at me and said, actually, the word I used was not malam. So I said, so what was the word? He said it was pee. Now, anybody who knows Tamil knows the difference between pee and malam. Now, malam is feces. Now, the moment I say feces, you think I'm in a biology lab, right? Pee is shit. Now, the imagery of shit and feces are two different things. He said the word I used was Nara P Allalama, but I was not sure whether you'll be comfortable singing it. And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I got on stage and I sang. It was so hard to sing it. I can't even explain to you how hard it was to sing it. Because the moment I said P, something was viscerally happening to me. Because I have this memory of Bhairavi, the raga, about the imagery of the song, of the raga being, what are the songs I've sung in Bhairavi about? I've sung about Kamakshi, by the way, in Bhairavi. I've sung about Rama in Bhairavi. I have this tradition of 200, 300 years where Bhairavi has inhabited so many space, and now I'm saying shit in Bhairavi. It was very hard as a practitioner to actually do that. But it took some time, and then I found a sound in P, in shit, that allowed me to transcend that problem. But the reason I'm giving you this example, this is a classic case of how actually this is about social identity, actually. This is about why certain words are not permitted in a practitioner, right? So the one thing that in any traditional art form we do is we use this word in India. This word is called sampradaya. And the immediate translation of that word is tradition. But we use it actually for two meanings. If you're willing to agree that tradition is not necessarily a stuck-up, dated idea, but something that's moving, it's more about a collection of threads that somehow reimagine themselves in the hands of human beings and people through generations. If that's tradition, there's another word. It's convention. And often we use sampradaya to mean both. In fact, we don't know when we are meaning what. And convention comes from a definitely different space. It comes from a space where it is about habit. It's about actually not being able to explain yourself. Actually, it comes from a place of ego. Great ego. So when you collapse these two, and these two are collapsed because of social reasons, everything falls into the category of sampradaya, of habit. And the moment I'm talking about sampradaya, let me try and explain to you what my classroom was like, music classroom. To further highlight how disconnected the classroom was from any of these conversations we're having today. So what would it be in my time when I learned music? I think it's fairly the same in most spaces even now, in the 80s and in the 80s basically. So my teacher was a traditionalist person, great teacher, but came from a different era, came from a small town, and you go into a classroom space. More than the music that has been taught you, the space already tells you what is expected of you. Everybody knew, especially the girls, exactly how they should dress. They knew exactly how they should behave. There will be pictures that will exactly tell you what is permissible, what is not permissible. So the entire space, even before you uttered one line of music, had already stationed you in caste, in gender, in society, in everything, in sound. It had already stationed you. So you say you're the first time you're going to the class. By the 6th class, you know exactly everything. Now, even in terms of, say, how you should produce sound, that was also defined by these social norms. There would be analogies used. which were othering analogies, don't sound like the rickshawala. Sounds like such an easy thing. Very easily said. Don't sound like you're screaming on the street, or something close to that, right? That tells you very easily on what you must sound like. And everybody has to sound like that. Of course, the attire you wear is also governed. If the girl student did not come with a bindi to class, it'll be provided for. Okay? I could get away with, of course, a lot. Boys generally can get away with most things, right? You could. And say there is an individual in the class who does not belong to the same social caste dynamic. The existence of that individual is ignored as being from a different caste dynamic. So the only way that person can survive in that environment, if they want to learn the music, and there's passion for music, and here is that very difficult contradiction for that individual. Because that individual knows that there is innate othering happening, but there is love to learn that musical form. Often in the social discussion, we don't discuss that contradiction and that difficulty that that person from within quotes outside struggles with. Because there is love for the form. I want to sing. So what do I do? So there is this tension that that person learns music with constantly. Constantly. So what kind of learning is happening over there? And also added to that is the culturing with which I come and the culturing which with an individual comes. Now, in my house, I come from a Brahmin house. Carnatic music was played in the morning. Morning, everybody knew 8 o'clock, All India Radio had one Carnatic music slot. Whether I liked it or not, the sound is already there in my ear. Right? There's no question of it. Now you have a student who loves this form and who has probably heard it from some other sources. But their house, they don't know 8 o'clock in the morning there's a radio program. They don't know, for example, that if you take the Hindu newspaper, third page, left side was entertainment column where you could know who is singing where that evening. Because part we are learning is about which concert you can attend to every day and listen. So where does that person learn? What does that person learn? What can they learn? What don't they learn? And the othering will happen in a slightly different manner. How much effort do you put to teach a student? Right? So it's not always an overt thing of saying, I will not teach somebody. No. After some time, somebody just stops coming to class. That's it. And then we would say, oh, the person is not interested, blah, 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 blah. Right? You can give 100 excuses. Let me just turn this to a contemporary situation. I'm slightly digressing, but... And this is something that, we deal with. Like, through our foundation, we try and provide music classes to people not from, shall we say, the traditional Brahmin community who learn Carnatic music. And it's, like I said, a very difficult task. Because there are so many layers of access that I had that individual does not have. So how do I provide it? So this young boy, immensely talented, comes and learns from my students and once in a while from me. Very natural singer. But his entire exposure to Carnatic music or learning is those 2 hours. Goes back home, he has to help his mom. There's no environment there. He doesn't know whether he can enter a concert space and listen because he doesn't feel welcome. Not that anybody's saying, shutting the door on him, but it's not welcoming. So he will not come. So how does this person, in a very practical way, shall we say, get better skills? How does that person move to the next grade of learning? So how do you create a social environment in order for that to happen? So it's not just about the classroom. It's about so much more. The language in the classroom, for example. What vocabulary do I use? How much am I thinking about the vocabulary I do? How much am I... Nobody thought about it. So we struggle with this fundamental thing. Now this young man is now working somewhere. He needs a job. He's working 14 hours a day. Can I tell him, no, stop working 14 hours a day. You can become a darn good performer. I can't. So all I'm saying is, often the insularity of practice in most art forms is also because we don't create a social environment that allows people not just the classroom access, but the culture access, which is much more harder, and which is where most of the learning actually happens. As you all know, most of the learning does not happen when you lecture. It happens after your lecture. But if there's no environment after the lecture, everything just drops. So it's a very, very difficult situation. The other thing that we have, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and we talked about categorizations, and one of the things that we have done in the classical word is this word classical. It's the most meaningless word you can ever use. It's a useless word I would say it's a word of oppression. That's what it is. It's a word of oppression. Because I tried thinking about this about a decade ago, and I said, okay, is there any aesthetic value to that word? In the sense, are classical art forms defined by certain characteristics that other art forms are defined by? And there's none. There's zero. You can't name one thing that is exclusive of a classical art form, which you don't find in another art form. When I say art form here, let me define. I'm talking about intentional practice art forms, not social art. By social art, you mean lullabies that you pick up from your parents, or occupational songs. Those fall into what you would call social art. In this kind of art forms, there's a practicing community or a group of people who are performers, who are singers, who are dancers, who train for it. And those are the art forms I'm talking about. In that, you can't find any difference. And then we use these words very easily, that the folk arts are rustic. They are earthy. They are raw. Oh man, that's one of the worst words for me. When somebody says raw, I'm like, it does something to my stomach. Because you're actually saying it's nothing, is what you're actually saying. So then we throw these words, right? You throw these words, and here we say profound, elevated, sophisticated, you're somehow considered a higher human being if you have some taste, right? Now imagine people who inhabit what is within, quote, expressed as the folk space, who want to learn a form that is expressed as the classical space. Just imagine the tension that automatically exists in that. It's massive. And there is other thing that already governs this framework is the notion of purity of sound. What is pure sound? What is impure sound? And somewhere that person has to accept at some point, if they want to enter this world, that they inhabited impure sound. And they're elevating themselves to pure sound. This is just violence. This is violence by sound. At the same time, you'll have the so-called classicals doing something interesting. So, Mridangam, I'll come back to it for another context, but I'll refer to it here. So, Mridangam, for example, is a two-sided drum that you will see in a concert. And there is some social history which I will address. But there's an interesting thing with the Mridangam. So, Mridangam is adopted from many other percussion instruments. Tabla, Pakhavaj, Kerala, instruments from Kerala like the chenda, etc. Right? And most people have had no problem with these adaptations. Right? Say, and I know, and I've heard it, when the Mridangam artist, irrespective of the identity of the Mridangam artist, adapts a sound or a combination of sounds from a parai, which is a practice by the Dalit community, the immediate reaction would be, there's something impure going on there. The combination of percussive sounds is identified as a social location. And that social location has no room in this sound. And the word that we'll say in Tamil, I have to say it in Tamil first. Why did he play so cheaply? I've heard this so many times when I've grown up, right? That there's something cheap about what happened. Now, as an insider here, you just say it and go. At the same time, I say this form should be welcoming to everybody else. But what happens when a person who is from the Dalit community, plays parai all day, wants to learn the Mridangam? he is not allowed to be himself and bring that sound into that percussion instrument. And I'm talking about within the practice of classical music, not in fusion or etc., because that we create another happy separation for that where anything can go. It's very smart, right? Because this is still protected. Don't touch this. So then what happens? So how can a person from a different identity really enter? Is it possible even? When the entire sound framework doesn't allow that person to inhabit their own identity, their own space, their own idea and come in, right? So there is a certain farce in this entire idea of saying we want these forms to be accessible. There's a farce, right? And in this farce, or at the center of this farce, is this thing that all of us within quote, high art, socially highly positioned art, are tutored to practice. We are tutored to lock ourselves in a room and sing. How ridiculous is that? And it's not just a physical locking up. It's a shutting off of the world. We use words like sadhana and riyaz for it. Those words can have other meanings, but the way we use it is different. What we actually say is, don't allow the world into your space of practice. And just sing. The world should not be connected to you. So one of the things you're saying is there is nothing temporal about your practice. There's nothing connected to the real world about your practice. So the real world should not ever enter your private practice. And the real world is the people of different ideas, different genders, different castes, different communities. So this entire idea of locking ourselves up is a fascinating mechanism. And that's something you practice repeatedly. There are, of course, stories of somebody lighting a lamp and practicing for 8 hours till the oil in the lamp went away. I'm told that story from I don't know when. I never practiced like that. I couldn't sit for 10 hours, I assure you. But so I'm told that you should not be connected to the real world. And here I have to give you another story. There is this fabulous artist. There's an art form called Katte Kuttu or Terukuttu. And we collaborate together and do something known as the Karnatic Katte Kuttu. And Rajagopal is one of the greatest artists of that form. And Rajagopal and I, what we decided when we did this collaboration is we decided that it's a problematic collaboration because we come from very different social locations and we are not, there's no fuse. We said, it's a conversation where we probably meet at times and we don't meet at times, right? So we created a conversation between the performance where Rajagopal and I will take positions and allow for a debate. So we debated caste through song, all through song, no words. Then we debated high art, which is higher. Is Carnatic music higher or Kuttu higher? We debated language. What kind of language? And when we are having this discussion on what to have part of this debate, he said something to me and he said, we talked about what does art mean to you? And what does it mean? And he very quickly said to me, art is labor to me. Now, that's a word I have never used in my life for art. I'll never forget it. I keep repeating the story because every time I say it, it shakes me. Have I ever said, my art is labor? It's riyaz, yes, but riyaz is not labor. It's sadhana, yes, but sadhana is not labor. But he said it's labor. Keeping aside that there are caste complications in that word, caste obligations that come with societal structures, but the idea of labor is got to do with the idea of the body. The idea of sadhana is divorcing yourself from the body. Riyaz is divorcing yourself from the body. Which is why you shut the world. Because you're reminded of your body only when you interact with the real world. If you don't interact with the real world, there is no reminding of yourself of a physical self. It's only an ideational self. And when he said labor, I said, please explain this to me. He said, no, every time I perform, it's labor. And that goes back to the idea of where is my physical self in my practice? Why is the physical self negated from my practice? Right? Many, if you even contemporary great musicians, they will give you this. If you ask them, classical musicians, they'll say, where did you get it? They'll say their guru's name, or they'll touch your ears and do all the drama. But after that, they'll say it all came. Where? Upar wale ne diya. What? It came from where? You sweated when you practiced, right? You were stinking and sweating. There was a body there. I was screaming my gut out. There was a voice. I will never talk about that. I'll never talk about that. These are all ways in which I am locating caste and gender. These are all ways in which I'm doing it in the practice itself without ever talking about it in the real actuated sense. So, what happened in Carnatic music? So let's just look at some threads of this conversation in Carnatic music. Tell me when I have to stop. Huh? I'll keep going. That's what I'm telling you. Oh, great. So let me give you some amount of basic history. Some may already know, but I'll just frame it again. If you look at the practice of Carnatic music, and I want to just tell you, I'm using Carnatic music as the anchor, but many of the ideas are applicable across board because it's the same mechanisms with different vocabularies and different social locations that are used. So Carnatic music, if you take the practice of Carnatic music through the 18th and 19th century, there were three primary communities practicing this art form. One were the hereditary dancers, the courtesans, who were then known as the Devadasis. You had the Nadaswaram and Tabla artists, who used to play these two incredible instruments, and mainly in temple contexts. And then you had the Brahmins. These were the three. And at that point, all three occupied the elite sections of society. All three communities. And there was what I would call a triangular relationship that happened between these three communities, where music was shared, music was composed, all this. And in that, I think each of them had kind of unspecified but specific roles. Brahmins predominantly were the composers and the theoreticians. The practice of the art, like performance, was mainly done by either the courtesan musicians, the women, or the Nadaswaram and Tabla, or men from that community also. So very closely connected with the development of Carnatic music is what was then known as Sadar, which is then renamed Bharatanatyam. These two are very close to each other, right? You can't separate the histories at all. So these three communities at that point are practicing this form. Now, what is very interesting is, even till the late 1900s, the idea of what a performance was not defined as one idea. There are multiple reasons for that. One, they were practiced in different spaces. So the temple outside space is a different space. The temple inside space, where you had a ritual connected, but at the same time a musical expression, which were mainly the community of the hereditary musicians, women who were singing and dancing. And then you had the court space. In court space, you had different things. You had these women also performing, but you also had what were musical battles. Two musicians would be like we see in our old cinemas, and really happened. So you'll have two musicians having a competition of who can sing one raga better or one composition better. So you had court performers. These spaces were very different spaces. And therefore, what was being sung in those spaces were also sometimes different. Then what happens, like with most things in Indian history, post mid-1800s, a lot of things change. One interesting thing is the Marathas coming to Tamil Nadu belt in the late 1667 or whatever, also had a big influence. With them came the Naradiya tradition of religious and bhakti sangeet, which was a Brahminical tradition that came to Tanjore. So there you have now practicing singers who are singing what is bhakti sangeet, coming into the hardcore belt of Tanjore. Now, with them came a different tradition of playing, say, the mridang itself. They had the bhajana style of playing the mridang, which they bring in there. And also, they were not Brahmin the Mridanga players, even them, were not Brahmin community, just to make that clear. So they come in, and there is a story. There's this great scholar, Uwe Swaminathan, one of the most important scholars of the 1900s, because if he writes 4 books. One is Yen Saritram, his own autobiography. He's a man who recovered all the Sangam literature of Tamils from households, went from house to house to house and collected it. Without him, we won't have that literature. Honestly, incredible man. And he writes the story of his own autobiography. Plus, he writes the story of 3 great musicians. Sangeeta Munmanigal, 3 great musicians of early 1800s. Through that, we have an idea of what was happening. And there's an interesting observation that he says. He says a lot of Tamil compositions are now gone, and they're dominated by only Sanskrit compositions and Telugu compositions. This he's saying in the mid-1800s. So here is the whole angle of language coming in to this whole question of gender and caste, right? So now when these compositions come, you have already Tyagaraja, Dikshitar, and Shama Shastri, the great musicians of the late 1700s, early 1800s, who have composed their compositions. But who was singing them? For example, nobody knows what Tyagaraja learned. He learned music. Does anybody know what he learned? Nobody knows. We have, of course, folklore. But what did he learn, like, when he started off? I know what I learned when I started off music. We don't know what he learned. So where was his songs being sung? Nobody knows. The interesting part is composition itself may not have been a performance aspect. Something we can't imagine today, especially with the complexity of compositions we have in Carnatic music. Composition were probably storehouses of knowledge, of the raga, of the music, which people need not necessarily perform on stage. But nevertheless, this bhajan sampradaya comes, then Tyagaraja's students start doing both bhajan and Carnatic music. In the late 1800s, it was more profitable for you to be a Namasankirtana musician than a Carnatic musician. So, both these are happening on parallel days. And soon, like with popularity with anything, these compositions of Tyagaraja, which these guys are rendering at a Namasankirtanam or a Harikatha, start overlapping into the concert world. Composition enters Carnatic music. It's a crucial point to this conversation on caste and gender. Right? It turns the whole notion of how do I perform this art form. Now, I'm going to cut this story short. There are a lot of other layers to it. But anyway, by the time we come to the early 20th century, slowly but steadily, there are other social actions. For example, the anti-notch bill has come up. You're slowly disempowering an entire community of their music, of their value, of their self-worth completely. And the men, the Brahmin men, are reconfiguring this art form to be a certain kind of performance. Now, the moment that is happening, you're saying compositions start becoming, Tyagaraja's compositions start becoming the bulwark of what a performance is. With that comes in the entire sentimentality that is attached to the idea of Tyagaraja, which in comes notions of purity, notions that Shringara, for example, is a very problematic space. Because your anti-notch is a fundamental attack at even that notion. So then Carnatic music is reframing itself very consciously into something that represents a certain Brahmin purity. And everybody has to fall in line. Now, just remember at that time, the only women who could sing outside were women from the Khorasan community. Now you have removed them. There are no women. What do? Then slowly you have 1 or 2 Brahmin women who start performing this art form. And one of the earliest is D.K. Pattammal, the great musician. She's one of the earliest women who started performing. There's another thread that happens is what has happened to these women who are musicians. See, the other thing is in this whole conversation about hereditary musicians, the women, we constantly talk of the dance aspect of that conversation. We never talk about the music aspect of that conversation. We forget they were singers. They were minds. We completely miss that singing aspect. So while the dance and the Sadir and the Bharatanatyam conversation is robust, at least now, the music conversation is not as robust. Right? So then you have that community disappearing. And then by then you've decided what a Carnatic concert should sound like. From beginning to end. How you should start it, what is the main aspect of it, what is the end. Now, what do the other community, the Nadaswaram Tamil, do? Now, please remember that these three, even in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were different ways of singing this form. I'll give you an example that Bhatkande describes. So Bhatkande, in his project to create Hindu national music, comes to South India. And guess why? Because somebody told him the tambrams are the brains. So he says, I'll come and I'll find, because he said, I want theorization of this music. His angst was against all the Muslims who were singing this form. He said they were singing crappy stuff. They are singing whatever they want and say, this is Shastra. So I need to find out where Shastra is. And of course, everybody said, you want to go to Shastra? Go to Madras and go to Tanjavur. You will find these guys, they have all the Shastra. Anyway, this man comes. He actually travels all around India, to his credit. He comes to Tamil Nadu. I got that entire thing translated in Marathi. It's fascinating. So he comes to Chennai. He meets a number of musicians. And he goes for a concert. And he goes for a concert by this great artist and great woman by name Bangalore Nagarathirammal. She's one of the most fascinating figures of the late 19th and early 20th century. She's from Mysore. She's from the traditional community. She was a musician. She used to do Harikatha. And it's only because of her we have today a place to go and pay homage to Tyagaraja. If she didn't find that spot, buy that land and safeguard it, and even now it is called Bangalore Nagarathirammal Trust. That land where all of us go is a gift by her. And if ever you go there, please remember to do one thing that most people don't do. Tyagaraja will be there. Turn around and there is an idol of her. Please go worship her and come. Everybody forgets she exists on the other side of the same courtyard. So this woman is singing a concert in Chennai. Bhatkande goes. And he says he doesn't like the sound of Carnatic music. That's very clear. Okay, he only thinks the theory is here. All the sound is in Khayal. He's very clear about it, okay? He's like, maybe all the brains are here, but his sound and all. In fact, he says, it's very fascinating. It's like an outsider coming into a new sound, right? So it's fascinating on other levels also. So this man listens to it and he says, there's this massive crowd and she seems to be a very famous person. And I'm sitting in this little room upstairs in what is now called town then. And Nagarathirammal starts singing. Then the audience member, somebody says, sing alaps. Now, only alaps. No composition. So she follows one alap after another, one improv after another, one after another. And he tries to identify the ragas with his knowledge of Hindustani music, and he gives some names to it. But that's fascinating. Practice is very different. Right? Parallelly, you have the Nadaswaram Tamil, who they have their own, it's a different caste community. Right? And they and the courtesan, they're more the same caste. They share the same caste community, but actually they were not a caste. They created a caste identity for social affirmation also. Isevelalar is the word that they created. It was created for social dignity because there was another dynamic over there. Because one of the communities that used to play the Nadaswaram were also the community who were barbers. And there was a stigma attached to it. And in order to separate that, you created another phrase called Isevelalar. And Velalar means irrigator of the land. Isevelalar means person who irrigates music. And that's how it was beautifully framed. It's actually a very gorgeous framing, just politically and even aesthetically. It's a beautiful framing. So anyway, so you had her and you have Nadaswaram Tamil. They never played compositions. They played raga after raga and walked around the entire temple. Now imagine all this is happening, and then you have the men from one community saying, concerts means it has to start this way, move this way. What happens? Everybody then is forced to somehow find their identity and within this musical framework that is being created. Right? So the Brahmin women are coming, they have to find a way to find some identity for themselves. So they find different routes. If the women are from the Devadasi community, they are trying to do a different route. If they are from the Brahmin community, they are trying to find a different route. Because until then, even the great Subramanya Bharati, has an essay on Carnatic music. And it's actually a problematic essay. And it's very odd. You expect Bharati to be one of those. He was one of the most progressive people of his time. But he has this comment in that essay, and I'm paraphrasing a bit. He says, and he's talking about Brahmin women. And he says, why do Brahmin women need to know about Tala and all properly? As if they're going to go out and sing on stage. They're going to sing only in religious, or what we call Kolu for Navaratri, or in some kind of house events. Right? So there is also this underlying idea of whether you're a Brahmin woman, there's a different fight. If you're a woman from the hereditary family, you're having a different fight. And then you're also posited against each other, by the way. That's also happening. So, for example, when D.K. Patamal sings a Ragam Tanam Pallavi and she gets the Sangeeta Kalanidhi, the greatest award in the late 60s, there is this constant sound you hear that she's the first woman to sing this complex idea called the Ragam Tanam Pallavi. This is a lie, outright lie. And how I discovered it, because another musician written an essay 1 year before about all the great women musicians he had heard, and he only spoke about women from the hereditary family, and one of them was they sang complicated Pallavis. So women from the hereditary family were already doing it 60 years before. So you disempowered them, and then you suddenly say this woman is the first one who's done it. Yeah, she sang brilliantly. That's a different issue. So you're also creating a conflict there between these two sets of women in some manner. There's parallelly another thing happening. You also realize that many of the people from this hereditary community are the ones who have the storehouse of knowledge. So what do? So you find a way to learn from them. Right? So all these musicians start going and learning. And of course, the most important person was this lady called Dhanammal, who lived in Madras then. The grand old arm of Carnatic music. And everybody goes and learns from her. Because she, interestingly, had a lineage that connects to Tyagaraja, that connects to Dikshitar, that connects to Shyama Shastri, 3 greatest composers in Carnatic music. She has a lineage that connects to all of them. So she has a storehouse of knowledge. So what do? You go and learn from her. So there's funny stories of how they could not, some two musicians decided to share a composition because they didn't want to spend so much money. So one person goes, learns the first part, this is a side story. And then the other person goes, learns the second part, and then they share the two together. So they basically cut cost on paying her. So this is a side story on it. But so now what happens is now you're using them as your knowledge base and you're disempowering them at the same time. It's happening at the same time. And if you ask me, where are the women from those communities singing? By the 60s, they were gone. By 60s, 70s, you don't have any one of those. There's also a very odd homogenization that happens. Now, for example, if you ask in Carnatic music world about women who were from the hereditary women community, I can only think of one family, the Dhanamma family. What about the diversity of voices that existed from the community? Where did they go? Everybody didn't sing like that family. So we say that family's music is really great, it's pristine, etc., etc. But what about the multiple voices? There is Kanchipuram sisters, there is Dhanakoti sisters, there are so many other people. What happened to the multiplicity of voices of women from those communities? That's also gone. So this complete homogenization is a social idea, it's a religious idea. It is definitely about putting at the center of what a performance is the idea of faith of a certain order and certain conditionality. It is not just Hindu religiosity in that simplistic sense. And another mechanism that works with this is technology. Now you have the microphone that arrives, right? The microphone starts doing another set of aesthetic interventions. So I'll just step back. There's another shift that's important to notice here, is a shift to what I would call the paid audience structure. Till then you had some zamindar or you had some king or some local chieftain or whatever patronizing these art forms, and you had this happening, right? Then by the 1920s or early 1900s, you have these organized, as we call sabhas, that crop up in the city of Madras mainly. And there's a mass migration of artists from multiple villages to this city. Similarly, you have some migration to Trivandrum, But Madras becomes the core in the south, as much as you had migration to Bombay at some point of time for a lot of Khyal singers. You have the same thing happening here. So with this, you have these organized places where people are paying money. So then musicians have to formulate way by which I please that audience. Right? So a formula is created that pleases that audience. Now, with that comes the microphone. Othering can happen in so many fascinating ways. So one of the ways to other is to say that music is too great, it can't be part of mainstream. It just flips the entire discourse on its head. You say it's too great, I will not question you, right? Means I'm respecting it. So the entire music of the Dhanama family has always had this thing told about it. It's just too sophisticated, it's too delicate, it's too nuanced. The general public will not understand. So you have to listen to them in a room. This famous soirees that Dhanama had in her house every Friday or something like that, where you had a group of connoisseurs and patrons go and listen. That's it. How many times did they perform in public? And if they performed, how many people came? So then you're doing another thing. You're homogenizing the taste of the audience. You're telling the audience you only listen to this kind of music. If it is not this kind of music, it is not mainstream music. So you're already erasing different interpretations, different sonic possibilities, and keeping some as exclusive. While you're sourcing material from the same exclusivity, by the way, it's just a complicated mess. Right? So you source, you say it's exclusive, you keep it in one showcase while you occupy all the space. And this is what is constantly happening. So imagine the women who are coming into this space trying to navigate this. So if I go back to that word I used, freedom, I don't even know whether it makes sense at some level. Right? What freedom are we talking about? Yes, at the moment, at the moment of something truly wonderful happening while you're singing, it's there. But just imagine the entire process of finding that space for yourself. And that's what these women were struggling with. So they all found their own avenues, all found their own way to kind of circumvent, kind of subvert, not confront directly, but find a way to position themselves within this environment. And even the Brahmin women, or we were not Brahmin, the struggle was real, right? So, one thing we always say, and we all say it as musicians, we say you have to find your voice. And it seems so ironic to use that phrase. Can you actually have a voice? Is it really possible for you to have a voice? And if so, what are you? Is your voice a voice that is only going to say this is not right? But can you find a location for yourself in that sound that is your voice? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. But it is a very complicated idea. So brilliance and pleasure and all kept aside, this is something that I think that is still a struggle for people who want to practice these art forms, right? There's a few other things. Okay. I also want to talk about a few other participants in this conversation. But before that, there is this: what about all the other art forms beyond the world of the classical? And what about the sublime and the profound in those art forms? I also have equally a problem when we categorize art forms that come from marginalized communities as protest art. That is also problematic, because then you're removing from it the experience of the sublime. That's part of that experience. It is political. Nobody is denying the politics of it. But if you ask that Pariyatam dancer, when he is dancing and playing the beat, what's going on to him inside? And he will tell you it's an art experience at that point. Something's happening. So I'm making this point because I think that we need to be very careful, because that can also be an othering discourse. By saying I'm not political, for example. You'll hear these musicians always saying, people of so-called high art will say, oh, there's no politics in my music. right? And that's politics. Everything is politics, one. Accept it. But then there is that different ideas of the profound, different experiences of the profound that are there, that every community, every social structure, every sound, every combination of colors have in them. So the politics is the politics in art forms is also embedded in the experience of something that is truly profound. And that's why we make art. That's why we sing. That's why we dance. When I sing a song that's politically overt, it's not just about me making a point to you. When I sing it, I'm experiencing something. I'm sharing that experience with you, not that uttering of that word of protest. In a way, the sublime is the protest. In a way, the profound is the protest. Because I'm challenging your profound. So I think that's the other thing that we need to be very careful with. And, I was telling somebody who came and met me yesterday in this story, all these things that we build around our elite heads, we have this whole, and I spoke about it too many times, about this whole idea of entering that space of art, right? Or that moment. We talk about that moment, artistic moment. And this was really something that happened. Myself and Sangeeta Shivkumar, a musician, and we were all in practice for the same Katte event. And I remember we were all sitting for practice. It was over lunch and we were all chatting. And these are young artists. They're not even like senior musicians. We were all like senior, right? And we were all like sitting there chatting and talking and shouting and screaming and having fun. And then Rajagopal said, okay, everybody, let's start. Literally, this is what he did. Every one of those people were in the moment. There was no drama about me having to get into the moment. They were there. They were present. It happened without jargons. It happened without intellectualizing it. And I remember we looked at each other at that moment and said, we just looked and smiled. And we said, just see what happened there. It was just stunning. Arjuna was there. Every character, Karna was there. The characters were all there. And these are young people who, they're in a way just getting up the ladder of, learning the art form. So I'm just saying that there's so much more to every art experience in every art form and in multiple social locations that we also should not miss in this discourse. And there was another layer of othering that happens, is the othering that happens through defining what knowledge is. Again, defined by a set of upper caste men, in this case, in Indian cases. Indian case, it's all. And probably that in some way addresses the point that you made. And there is a problem. That it's only upper caste men who are here in front of you. And defining what knowledge is in some way in the discourse. And that's exactly what happened 100 years ago. So when we were formalizing Carnatic music, we had to create theorization, right? And anti-colonialism was colonialism of sorts, right? Because in the process of anti-colonialism, we copied every dumb thing they did. So we decided that no, we need to create theories of where this great music came from, whether it's Hindustani music or Carnatic music. So let's go and look at all these old treatises and make all the stupid errors these guys made. And then you had, for example, in Carnatic music, the Music Academy, who then was the premier body, saying we need to have discussions. And within intellectual elitism, there is another layer. The other layer is also the fact is if you went to college and studied anything, you could be a lawyer. But if you dabbled with music, you know more. Right? So you had lawyers framing what are the rules for ragas. I'm not even kidding here. This is serious. Most ridiculous nonsense. But actually think of it, it's not. Because even now after a concert, I hear 3 sets of people. I was telling my student yesterday who are obnoxious. One are management consultants. The other are pure science people. The third are guys in technology. They think they have figured out everything about anything in the world and they'll come and give me advice on some raga. I'm like, will you shut up? Right? So, sorry? So at that time you had lawyers who would be part of the discussion and tell musicians, no, that can't be right. Now, among musicians, there is another section, right? So you have the Brahmin musicians, you have the Brahmin educated lot, college educated lot to be more specific, and then you had the ones from the Nadaswaram Tamil community. So you have this complicated set of people trying to get idea of knowledge, and the one of the lower is this, because they will tell you only practice. So the idea of knowledge is ultimately defined by vocabulary. Nothing but vocabulary. Often knowledge is confused as vocabulary. Right? So the guys who could frame their vocabulary that worked for a colonial kind of a framework were making the rules. So then you have an othering of even ideas in ragas happening. And there are no women in this conversation. Zero. No women at all. Right? And so you have rules being framed. You have regulations saying this raga should not do this. And the Nadaswaram artist is saying, I know. I mean, I play this every day. I played it for the last 50 years. Isn't that knowledge? Isn't that adding something to the sound of the raga? No. We have to clean it up. Cleansing is our favorite idea. So cleanse it up because there's an issue of purity. Right? And with purity is this very stupid idea of consistency. Anything consistent can't be art. It can't be art. If something is consistent, it's skill. And I'm glad it is. But it's not art. So there's this so you have this whole knowledge framing that's also completely separating communities, separating genders, all this. In all my investigation, and there's one aspect that I never thought about for a long time till about 2016, which were another set of knowledge creators who were the people making the instruments. And I never thought about it for a long time. And it's like it hit me seriously like a slap on my face. And it was like, whoa, what about them? So I thought that was a project that I had to do, go and speak to mridangam makers. Why especially mridangam makers? Two primary reasons. One is the caste dynamic there is very interesting. The mridangam maker fund mainly comes from the Dalit community. Okay? The mridangam player is 99% Brahmin. Oh, there's another aspect to that. There's so much. I'll leave that aside. Is the idea of arithmetic and caste. I'll come to that also. Maybe I'll just talk about it a little bit. But so anyway, and you have these two sets of people who belong to very different social locations, kind of relating with each other. Why are they relating? Why is it different from, say, a violin maker? Now, a violin maker or a tanpura maker makes the instrument, gives it to you. You really don't have a relationship with the maker after that. Now, with a mridangam or a tabla, it doesn't work that way. You have to constantly maintain it. There is a skin removing happening. It has to be replaced. There's a black patch that is replaced. So there are two aspects. You need a constant relationship. You also need a dedicated relationship because the maker needs to understand you as an artist. So the maker needs to know nature of your hand, nature of your playing technique, your stress points, what kind of sound you like. Imagine such an abstract idea. The maker understands what is the sound of him. And I have to make an instrument that will make you realize that sound. I mean, it's astoundingly beautiful. When a maker told me this, I was blown away. I said, how do you know? He said, I know. He said, I know. And it's not just practice. It's a sensibility. Right? And I don't know the difference. If Ashutosh and Leela were both getting a mridangam made from a maker, he would know what kind of sound you want and what kind of sound you want. To me, both, if I tap both, will sound the same to me. But you will say, and the words that mridangam players use are very interesting. Right? They'll say, it's just not okay, I don't feel comfortable. Now, it makes no sense. Right? What does it mean I don't feel comfortable? No, there's something, in that tone, it's not okay. I mean, this is a very, very vague notion. The maker will say, wait, I'll get it done for you. I know what you're talking about. So I wanted to investigate this. And I began, of course, your sense will be like black and white. But it's not black and white. It's such a complicated relationship. And I traced them for over 100 years and looked at their lives and looked at the knowledge, the making of the mridanga. My God, every step of it was incredible. And there's an entire technical vocabulary that is used for the making that sounded like Greek and Latin to me. It was all in Tamil. It was just, I didn't even know what word. And most people who are experts in their field will just use, we all do that, right? We use words very quickly, thinking the other person understands what you're talking about. Have no clue. I had no clue what you're talking about. So I'll stop you and say, okay, what does this word mean? What does that word mean? And then I ask my Tamil scholars and say, is it there in any lexicon? It's like, no, I've never found this word. Can you please find all these words and give it to me? I'll add it to the lexicon next time. So it was a fascinating world to enter. And in that world is also this complicated idea of caste, of gender. Women don't make mridangam, even there. The men there will tell you, no, women don't do very hard work. It's very hard physically. But the women are the ones who break that very hard stone that needs to be broken to make that black patch. Nobody will talk about it. And these men, so I think the most impactful experience for me going to the abattoir and sourcing the skin. And the entire process of finding that skin that is appropriate for making a mridangam. And there are many lies perpetrated that's obviously perpetrated for purity's sake. They'll say, no, only dead animal skin is taken. That is just nonsense. You can't take a dead animal skin for a very practical reason. It'll clot. With the moment blood clots, it becomes like cardboard. So it cannot be a dead animal. It has to be an actually killed animal. It can't be old because old skin is not good. In fact, the goat or the buffalo or the cow that is used, all three animal skin is used for the mridangam, have to be female and have to have delivered at least 2 to 3 times. Because the most precious skin is from the stomach area. And if they've delivered, there's elasticity. It's very specific. Right? So it has to be not too young, not too old. So this entire process of removing the flesh, removing the fat, curing the entire skin, making the mridangam, and the whole idea of blood. There's blood everywhere. And I still remember one maker, it's there in the book somewhere, and I said, you do all this work, it's all in blood, and it's so hard, and nobody knows. He stopped me and he said, but... He said, when people come to the concert hall, they don't want an image of blood. They just want to be elevated. So all this has to be behind the scene. They can't realize that it came from blood. So there's a contradiction of being elevated in the profound and flesh, blood, death. The coexistence of that and not allowing for that conversation physically between people and also ideationally is a kind of an offense. Right? Does the experience of the mridangam change after that? Of course it does. You see the mridangam differently. You hear the sound differently. So there are many stories with the mridangam makers that I can go on. And of course there's the social stigmas. The relationship with the Brahmin players or even the other upper caste players was complicated. But many things changed. So, for example, in the village, the houses always had 3 or 4 doors. So, depending on your caste identity, you knew which door to enter, which door to exit from, right? Then many of these musicians moved to the city. First, the houses were smaller. There were not too many doors. So that kind of renegotiated space and caste. Then they moved to an apartment. Now, the dining room and the hall are all one space. It renegotiates again the idea of intimacy. The closeness changes. First, I've heard stories of how the maker would come, keep the mridangam just outside the house and go away, and the student will pick it up and take it to the teacher. Now, all this starts getting renegotiated the moment space changes, right? Then the Chennai Madras-based mridangam makers do one thing brilliant. They say, I'm not coming to anybody's house to do mridangams. I will open a shop. You guys want to get your mridangam repaired? Come to my shop. That changes entirely the equation of the relationship now. Again. So there are also these fascinating shifts in the relationship that's constantly happening, right? And being, constantly reevaluated because of sometimes circumstances, because of technology, because of even assertion. And I think that's also got to do with Tamil Nadu's politics. These assertions also came for the change in Tamil Nadu's politics. Though they were not overt. See, but there's also a little logjam for the mridangam maker. See, the mridangam maker, and I think this is something that sometimes activists don't get. And there's a problem here. The logjam is the mridangam maker cannot completely go against the playing community. Because survival entirely depends on that community. So you can't expect him to be a Dalit activist on the street. His position is very, very delicate. By the way, he wants to make the mridangam. That's the other fascinating aspect. Could you say, I went and asked, why do you want to make the mridangam, right? Just let this go. You do something else. No, there is pride in that. In the sound he is creating. Sir, enna mari evana sound panna mudiyuma, sir. He tells me, can anybody make the sound like me? Can I disvalue that and make a sociological observation that is also part of oppression? I don't know. Because when I speak to him, he's a thrill when he creates that sound. So how does one negotiate that between that complexity of the experience of that sound for that maker at that moment and the very evident oppressive environment that the maker is in, at the same time an economic reason for which he has to remain within that space. So the web within a web within a web. So it's a very, very complicated space. And I also, in the book, I try and inquire is saying, is there love? Is something I try and inquire. Because these are relationships go for 20 years between a maker and a thing. The one way to look at it, no, it's an oppressive environment. There can't be. How can an oppressive environment have it? But then there is also these stories that kind of indicate something that at times transcend, at times gets trapped again. I don't know. So it's a very, very uneasy space to observe. And I don't think I'm in a position to pass any kind of a judgment on any of those things. But just say this is very, very complicated. And I'm not going to negate an expression of an individual. I'm not going to negate that. Right? So all this, and finally, I'll come to this issue of Me Too. I wanted to finish with that. And the whole, go back to the classroom before I. So this normalization of toxicity and sadhana. Let's put that together for a moment. Just think about those two things together for a moment. Because toxicity is normalized by using the word sadhana. By saying that your practice and that pushing you towards that corner, now that's defined by the teacher, what that corner is part of the process of finding your voice. Right? And that's such a toxic combination of words. And as a student, you can't get out of that web because you also want to work hard within quotes and master the idea of whatever the rag is or the sound is. And if you bundle toxicity into that, I can't get out of that trap. There's no way I can. Because I am, in a way, saying I'm forgoing my search for the music also if I do it. And it's always put together, which is why it's put together. So it never happens by itself. Sexual abuse or classroom toxicity is not an independent happening. It happens with the idea of intense learning. This is what we forget again in the discourse around this. We treat them as being like separate things. They are not separate, which is why it makes it very difficult for a person who's stuck to find a way out. Because you're also afraid you're giving up something else. Right? Just like a person from a different caste group is afraid of giving up something else when he knows that he feels othered, here you also are afraid of giving up something else. And this allows for anything to happen. So she referred to my piece in the Indian Express and about the Guru Shishya Parampara, and which was, I think, many people took offense to the piece because it was a very hard piece where I said there's a problem in the entire structure. And there is. This romanticization of this notion of the Guru Shishya is deeply problematic. Now, if you're going to ideationally talk about the relationship between a teacher and student, we're talking about something else. We are talking about the real practice and the sharing of space within a structure. Those are two different conversations. Because I believe that relation between a mentor and student can happen in any environment. It can happen here. You don't need to have the Guru Shishya Parampara. Because the Guru Shishya Parampara does one fundamental thing, is questioning is not there. So another fascinating, very, very ugly thing that this parampara does, it also curates what questions can be asked. In fact, if you go to a classroom, everybody knows what questions they can ask. I'll put a wager on this. Go to a traditional music classroom, get all the students out and say, can you tell me what are the kind of questions you can ask? They will all tell you the same kind of questions. I know the questions already. Ask them what are the questions they can't ask. They also know that. So are they really asking questions? No. Right? Nobody's asking a question. It's a lie. But you play, it's role play that just goes on. So you create this entire structure that does not allow what is at the essence of what art making should be. And I'll end with that. The notion of freedom. The idea of finding one's own voice. In every manner, from the classroom to practice to observation to judgment, it has always been a case of limiting, erasing, and always othering of some sort. So that within all this, we find music. Do we find music? Maybe we do. Maybe we don't. And it depends on who's asking that question, depends on who's answering that question. Because a lot of people I know have left music, have run away from dance, have run away from theater because of this. So what does that mean? Thank you very much. I'll stand here, prefer standing. Just get some water, is that possible? Oh, this one.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ram Krishnan, and thank you for your amazing talk. I have a couple of questions. One is, do you see the same trajectory within a Hindustani North Indian tradition?
Yeah.
The point I'm trying to get to is the hierarchical structure that you see within Karnatic unique to Carnatic form of music, or is it prevalent in other musical traditions as well?
Okay, I'll answer that first. I think I mentioned that in passing, and I said I'm using Carnatic as the basis of the discussion, but this is applicable across board. 100% Hindustani music is filled with it. It's overflowing with it. But they have a great facade to not even address the issue. And I'll tell you what the facade is. There is one anchor to that, which the reason why, for example, you can overtly ask these questions is the fact that we sing compositions. The fact that in Carnatic music you sing, shall we say, religious compositions, religious in content, not religious compositions. I'll correct myself. They are religious in content, but not religious compositions, according to me. And the fact that they overtly represent a certain section of society, which is the Brahmin section of society, right? In their content. This allows for this conversation to happen. This whole idea that we only sing about love allows Khayal to completely not have this discussion. They also don't have the religious discussion. What's the role of a declared atheist in Hindustani music? Will he survive? I don't know. So these hierarchies also exist there. There are caste hierarchies there. There are definitely caste operations happening. If you look at the major singers in Hindustani Khyal music today, we can have this conversation. So there is caste happening there. There is underlying religious bigotry that goes unquestioned, all happening. But because of the content of what is sung in terms of compositions and also the spaces of where they are performed, and interestingly, it also allows them to use the Khyal tradition, having come from an Islamic tradition, as a cover to not have the conversation. That's the truth.
Thank you for that. Again, for the second question, if you do not want to answer, I completely understand. Regarding the controversy
Pass.
around...
Hello, my name is Katyayani. I'm a student of anthropology here. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a real education listening to you. My question follows up from the last one. I really like the way in which you talk about culture and how Karnatic and the sound has to be pleasing to certain eyes, certain ears, and it is about your position in a particular culture and your relation to it. I wanted to build on the first question and bring back what you said about the politics of Tamil Nadu. And if you could speak more about how the political history of Tamil Nadu enables you to stand here and share all of this with us, as opposed to the politics of, say, Uttar Pradesh, where I am from.
I understand. Well, I think first of all, your observation is right. Definitely, I think the social and political history of Tamil Nadu, and I will say, not only allows me to stand here, but has pushed me to think in this manner. I should thank the political history and the work done in Tamil Nadu that pushed me to ask these questions. Because when I saw reality around me, it made me ask these difficult questions. And I want to say one thing. I'm actually asking these questions of myself. I'm just placing it in this forum. I think that's very important for anybody with privilege who's having these conversations. So always remember, the question is first being asked for yourself, because you're going to constantly ask it. You have to constantly ask it. And that's when you'll remain real. So Tamil Nadu has definitely played a huge role. So Carnatic music's relationship with Tamil Nadu's politics is very interesting. That itself is a fascinating story, right? So I'll give you a little history there, because it's quite interesting. So Carnatic music by 1920s becomes part of mainly practiced by only the Brahmin community. By the 1930s at least, 30s, 40s, few people from the Khorasan community are still practicing, hereditary community practicing, now from Tamil is happening. But nevertheless, this very overt idea of singing praises and singing in Sanskrit and Telugu mainly, because Tyagaraja and Dikshitar were the bulwark of the compositions being sung, which had entered the concert stage. So then you have something known as a Tamil Isai movement that happens. This is basically a Tamil music movement saying that Carnatic music you should sing in Tamil. Why are you singing it in Sanskrit and Telugu? Now, it was not just a linguistic movement, it was also an anti-caste movement. Right? And the most fascinating thing at that time, it's there in the archives, is to go and see the letters of argument on both sides presented in the Hindu. Okay? So you have many, including people like T.T. Krishnamachari, who's a congressman, a politician, a businessman, who's saying, no, why Telugu and Sanskrit are better languages? They're more pretty to the ear, arguing that. Then you have on the other side saying nothing doing, we have great music. And he said, do you have great compositions in Tamil that can really match this? So these kind of arguments are happening. You have some Brahmins also on the other side who say, no, Tamil is as good, etc., etc. Now, this battle is going on. Then because of which you have an organization and university, Annamalai University is founded. You also have the Tamil Isai Sangam founded in Madras. Now, the interesting interloper in this conversation is Periyar. The story goes like this. The story goes, Periyar was asked about this. And everybody think what? Periyar would say, of course, Tamil. You know what Periyar did? So apparently the story is they asked him, what do you think of this Tamil movement? And they're challenging Brahmin hegemony, all this. He said, listen, whether they sing in Telugu, Sanskrit or Tamil, they only sing about God. So what difference does it make? It's a fascinating argument, right? You can agree, disagree with him, but the way he looked at it was very differently. So if I was going to take that and say, he's also asking the questions on what else can you sing about? Right? So then what happens is, so as you go, so in a way, but I believe that there is a one mistake. This is my opinion, is that instead of pushing away Carnatic music as being Brahminical and part of Brahmin, if the Dravidian movement and I had inversed it and said, boss, this doesn't belong to you, it belongs to all of us, then we would have had a very interesting social dynamic that may have evolved. That really didn't happen. That's the truth. Because what really happened is they pushed it, the Brahmins held on to it even closer. Right? So there is this tension that developed. At the same time, Tamil Nadu has a number of music colleges, government music schools across the state. So that was also happening. Now, in that, there's another problem that was created. This whole idea that even now, I gave a talk in Tamil and I in fact made the point, I don't think many Tamils were happy. I said, you positioning Tamil music as different from Carnatic music is a problem. Now, Tamil music can be any genre. It's a linguistic identity, right? It can be cinema music is Tamil music. But you're saying, by saying Carnatic music is different from Tamil, you're missing the point that Carnatic music needs to be Tamil. That's the argument you should be making. Like, so even now in Tamil discourses, in Tamil musicological discourses, they'll say Tamil is say vera, Carnatic is say vera. They're different. And I'm saying, no. The genre is, you call the genre something else if you want to. I have no problems with that. But then you're not challenging that intellectual hegemony that is being built around the Carnatic unless you say Tamil is part of that intellectualism. Right? So that's a struggle that still happens. There's a tension. And there's musicological, historical tension. Because the Tamil musicologists will say this entire Carnatic music's grammar and history came from the Sangam period, from Silapatigaram, and the whole idea of the raga came from the idea of the pan. The counter-argument will be from the Sanskrit scholars will be, no, it all came from the Sangita Ratnakara. Of course, truth lies somewhere in between. But both are political positions. So it's being argued more on a political front rather than serially investigating treatises and seeing if there are differences in saying, you ask me, ancient music, whether it's Tamil or Sanskrit, was completely different from what we are seeing today. That's my musicological position, not my political position. But it's very hard to have that discussion because the battle is very, very tight. So Tamil Nadu has had a role to play in the way that you can ask these questions without doubt. But I also believe that it's not participated enough in reimagining notions of the classical, reimagining the idea of what was considered elite art. Not enough. I think it's changing. I think it will change. But I think that also the whole idea of caste and gender also comes into that. Right? So, like, for example, we work with the government music college. And one of the arguments always thrown at me is that there are not enough people from other communities who want to learn this music. That's just nonsense. So I will tell you a very real issue here. So one of the things, government music college, a lot of students, about 300 students every year enroll. And about 90% are not from the privileged caste. They are from villages and towns. So I always say, where do they go? What do they do? Some of them will probably go and sing choruses in cinema. Some go back to their town and have some school. Or some people get a job in some government school or some private school and teach music. So my question was very simple. Are you telling me in the last 30 years, if 200 students were coming every day, there was not 10 that could have come out? Yeah. So then there's a chasm between mainstream practice of this musical form and this world. So we have to create a bridge. And how does one do that? So these are all actual ways in which that we need to work also, right? Sure.
I'll try to be very quick. Hi, my name is Brian. Thank you so much for the talk. My question, I think, kind of builds a little bit on Katyayani's, but one of the words that seems to be on the table is the word reform. And I think reform is often used, particularly when talking about the classical arts, and caste to say that, many of the things that were not tenable were reformed out of
Which is why I didn't use the word.
Exactly. So, but if you're thinking about dance, for instance, right, the Padam was reformed out, and then it now has come back in. Now you have people who pretend to be Devadasis, who are dance. And I guess the question that I want to ask is, why is it that both practitioners and scholars rely so heavily on the language of reform and not the language of appropriation? And what would it do for how not only music and dance, classical, are practiced, but how they are...
Sorry, last part, just go again.
Yeah, what would it do for us to use the language of appropriation and not the language of reform to talk about the history of classical art? Because it seems that so much of the story of reform is about particularly caste-oppressed folks disappearing, and yet their sound is there, their gestures are there, their music is there, right? But we just say that it's been reformed out, and yet it's still there.
That's strategy. Simply put, that's strategy. If I use the word appropriation, I am pointing that the mirror is on me. That's exactly the problem. So I don't want that. Since I don't want to have the mirror on me, I want to say there was a problem out there, and it's not even a savior complex, it's a savior tactic. It's a savior tactic. So the word reform, which is used because you're saying that something needed rescuing, and I rescued it, which is why I think you don't use the word appropriation. And that's also because who are the people speaking this? Even people who are within the progressive world, or whatever word you want to use, is that you think that you are, even if you're bringing that discourse back, you think you're doing a favor by bringing the discourse back. And you're centering yourself in that discourse. And if I center myself in the discourse, it cannot be appropriation. It has to be reform. And it also probably goes into the other fact that in knowledge creation, you still have people like me having this conversation. And that's as problematic. So it's not just in the practice of art, it's also in the academia of art, it is also in the thinking of art that we need many more people to come and occupy those spaces, right? And actually say, and honestly, they should be deciding what word is appropriate. Not me, right? So I think there's also that aspect that we have not got to a point yet where there is tension in creating this vocabulary. There's no challenge to vocabulary. Not enough. Not enough. There is, but not enough. And I think more and more there is challenge. The vocabularies will keep changing, right? But for that also the demography of the practitioner needs to change. It has to happen together, right? And that's very hard. And sometimes that's going to take 2 generations. And that's a slow process because there's a lost time. There's a lost time of 50, 60 years sometimes, right? So how does one it takes a decade sometimes to come and take those spaces. And of course, the complexity of even the space. Is the space given with dignity? Is the space given with a realization of appropriation? Or is that another favor? So, and that individual is also struggling with that, right? Now all individuals cannot take a frontal aggressive stance. Let's hypothetically take a situation where you have an artist who doesn't belong to this Brahminical community, wants an opportunity, and knows very well the opportunity is given for I'm supporting. Does the person take that opportunity or not? What's the right answer for that? I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. Because you can look at 2 ways, saying that no, if that place is not given to me with respect, I will not accept it. But is that person in the position to do that? Can I demand that of that person? That kind of, I don't know. I don't think I can, very honestly. I can't. Now, say the person takes that opportunity. Then is the person allowing themselves to be co-opted? Or is the person going to find a way to find their own way to push back from within the space? Or very difficult, right? So, I mean, I think in a way it's a very complicated kind of tussle where sometimes I think it takes time and that's why I feel collectives are very important to change that vocabulary also. Coming together in collectives is very, very important, I think.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. And I appreciate the point you're making about, look at the intrinsic music itself, not just the social surround, which is of course important as your talk shows. So the question is really about a certain kind of stumbling that happens when you're listening to the music itself. Let's say I'm listening to a Kriti by Purandaradasa, right? And I'm deep enjoying it, but I stumble on the patriarchy in it, right? And it's a real stumbling, and it interrupts my enjoyment of the music, and I find Jagoto Dharan, I go somewhere else. So I know how to navigate that, but there is a real interruption in the enjoyment because of a construct that I can't emote with. Now, as a singer, I want to ask you, how do you handle the interruption, given your sensitivity and your awareness of things? How do you handle this interruption?
Okay, there's another complexity to that. So again, last talk, we talked about the idea of the word meaning, the sound meaning. Sometimes the most patriarchal word can have sound meaning that is very beautiful. It's a contradiction, but it can. Yeah, if you don't, it can. If you don't know the meaning. If I don't know the meaning, it's just sound. It's a combination of sounds and consonants. And in a musical flow, the sound together emotes something. Now, when I know the meaning, it's a different issue, right? Because both are real for a musician, let's be very clear. Mm-hmm. A musician does not know the meaning of every word a musician sings. Does not. So, this is a very tough question. So, I've struggled with, for example, there are a few compositions I don't sing anymore.
Okay.
Musically, I love them. I don't sing them because I don't know how to deal with it. In fact, the melody of that line, which is oppressive, is gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's brilliant work. But the words are not something in today's world we would say. Yes, you can contextualize it and say it came from a certain time period. There's another way of looking at saying it's a certain time period and certain social structure, and the person came from that structure and did it. But I'm a man, upper caste man saying this, so it's very easy for me to say it, right? So I'll give you two stories for this. One story happened years ago. So when I wrote this book, Southern Music, which is in 2013, and if you read the book, the chapter on language, I make this entire argument that it's the sound that really matters. That's the sound of the consonant and the vowel is all that matters. So I take language to be entirely an abstract idea of sound. Okay? And I made that argument. And I was at a school and I was giving a lecture. And I finished the lecture and a high school student got up and said, thank you very much for the talk, really enjoyed it, but I have a question for you. I understand your point that language as sound is quite a fascinating idea. I like it, but I have a question. If the song that you sing propagates violence, will you still say it's sound and sing it? Of course, I found a way to escape that question because I knew I was stuck. But that question stayed with me. And said, because violence is felt by somebody, right? I may not feel the violence. So that's when I kind of re-looked at my work with word. And I said, if to move people to the abstract sound, you need to first work with the idea of meaning. And allow meaning to give you the avenue to get to sound. I can't take an absolute position of sound and not find a journey towards sound. And invite you to participate in that journey with me. That's when I started working with Murugan. That's when I started working in Narayana Guru. That's when I started because I said, we need to find avenues in which we can create musical experiences through different meanings, ethical meanings, that finally dissolve. Right? Now, that's one story. The second story is one boy came to me, a lecturer of mine, and said, Anna, I love this Kirtana of Tyagaraja, but this line is deeply disturbing. What do I do? I want to sing the song, but I can't sing that line, just like you, stumbling block. Now, as a singer, you can't just jump to Jagadodharana at that point of time. You have to sing that song, right? Now, I said, I don't know what to do. So I said, don't sing it. He said, but I love it. So, at the same time, there's been cases where I changed the word. I've done that too. So, for example, just like the N word, you have the P word in Tamil, okay, which is you don't utter. And it's in the song, so I'll utter it in the composition first. So, Gopalakrishna Bharati makes a composition called Varagalamu Ayya. The entire story is of a Dalit who wants to go and worship Shiva. and his landowner is not allowing him. He's an oppressive man. And he's asking Shiva, can I come? Can I come to see you? Can I come to worship you? Right? In that, the second Anupalvi of the composition is Parama Kripa Nidhi Allavo. Parama Kripa Nidhi Allavo. And the next line is, the actual word is, in the Parayan Upacharam is where it comes. There's a line. Now, it used to be sung like that. And with Tamil Nadu's politics, people realized very quickly you can't sing that word. So some musicians changed it to in the Yedai Upacharam, which is a poor person. It could be anybody, right? But there's an aesthetic problem with that. And I'll tell you what the problem is. There has to be a second syllable. I'm just giving you the complexities of this. The second syllable rhyme is very essential. So, Parama Kripanidhi Allavo in the Para matches. But Yedai doesn't match. So what do you do there now? Do you sing Yedai or not? So I found another word. I sing in the Naranin. So there's so many negotiations here. There is negotiations of meaning, there's negotiation of society, negotiation of aesthetic structure, poetic structure. There are many things. There are about 3 songs I don't sing. I just don't sing them. I don't. That's the only way out. And you can ask the question, can I just change that line, for example? I'm not very comfortable with that. In this case, there's a no-brainer, right? You have to. But I'm not very comfortable of entirely changing. So I very strongly believe if you replace one syllable to another syllable, the melody is a different melody. That's a philosophical point. The melody itself is different. So if I'm going to restructure an entire line, I'm actually creating another melody.
But you wouldn't say that it's time to create another melody because of the...
I don't say sing. Content. There are so many other compositions. Sing those. Okay. Create your own composition. Sing those. That's a different thing. I do that. But if you ask me to go and change that line in that composition, I'm not very comfortable doing that. Because then the composition is not the composition. It is some other composition. I just do a new composition for that. Why change that line? That maybe challenges what is said in that composition. If I want to be political, I could do that. So it's kind of a very, very, very complicated, very kind of a messy place. There's no right answer to this. Everybody's kind of navigating it if they want to, right? Yeah.
Hey, awesome talk here.
Oh, thank you.
I have a far more simple question. What do you think social media is doing in this context, in what you have discussed? What's the role social media is playing? The pro, con?
Social media? Well, I think it plays both roles. I think social media also gives space for voices that were not there before. So it's allowed for a lot of robust voices to emerge from social media, to be able to challenge all these notions. That is truth. It doesn't allow just voices like mine, for example, to be heard. That's the very good thing. The other side is, in the long term, social media locks all the voices. So social media is a good opening, but you can't live there. It gives you a space that was never there, say, for example. It's not easy to enter Brown. So you can stand outside Brown and get your space through social media. But at the same time, you need to find ways in which you don't get stuck in your discourse only there. Otherwise, there'll be only one set of people listening to that discourse in social media, because social media operates that way. The algorithm is going to make sure of it. So you need to know how to use it and then get out without getting stuck. So it plays both roles. It completely does. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's okay, I would like to head off in a different direction. Since so much of the talk has been about social identity and the different groups participating in music, I'm just curious what the situation is, or attitudes are, or your thoughts are about all of the non-Indians, the foreigners who've been involved in Indian music for so many decades.
You mean white
now.
people?
Maybe there's some Japanese as well.
Yeah, there is. But it's a very good point, because the way I see a white person involved and the way I see a Japanese scholar is entirely different. There's a difference. And it's in scholarship, I can show you how they're viewed differently. So the white person is the upper caste Brahmin. I'm saying he's upper caste Brahmin, which means the white person is placed one step higher. So the white person who wanted to sing Carnatic music is celebrated, or sing Khayal is celebrated, or play tabla is celebrated. Because see, even those people want to come and learn our music. Right? So it's a no-brainer. It's absolutely a no-brainer. So I mean, it's that's how it is viewed. Right? So you don't have a complicated discussion about that. Interestingly, appropriation is never used as a word there also, by the way. Yeah. So, sorry. So, for example, I mean, there are a few Japanese who have sung. They are not even, I mean, how much discussion happens over their music? Very little discussion. And few scholars have been critical of this entire South Indian framework and who have written about it, who have been attacked for it. The same sociological frameworks have been written about in the past. And they've been attacked for it. So the white person, there's another thing. It's always felt that it is growth for these art forms if it's accepted in the Western world in a larger framework, right? And that, because there's always been a competition between the notion of the classical between nations, right? And in that, you want to always prove that you're as classical as the classical. Like, I find it extremely offensive that we still use the word ethnomusicology in this country. It's a racist term. It needs to go. I don't know when it's going to go. It just needs to go. Because the fundamental aspect of that is to say there's something of idea of a classical and music studies that is independent of ethnomusicology, right? So I think there is also this cultural battle that is there from the early 1900s itself. For example, when we start writing notations, the way we write our notations, we want to prove that we can write notation to our music. We want to tell the world that if you can write your music, I can write my music, right? So there is also this cultural push that is happening. So when the white person participates, it's a kind of a victory of a sort. It's kind of a cultural victory. So there is a great celebration in that. Definitely, right? Like, how many times do we bother about, say, even gamelan music in India? Nobody knows anything about it. Who knows anything? Come to India, nobody knows what's happening. So I don't really care about my Southeast Asian friends or even the classicals there, right? Or the Japanese classical. I don't really care. I have only one target. And that's the notion of the Western classical. And that's my only point of contact and point of reference. So I think that tells you a lot on how our brain works culturally. Yeah.
Was Bhatkandi the first musician to come to South India, and what time period was?
Bhatkandi came in 1904. It's 04 or 06. I always get confused. I think it's 04.
04, okay.
And so he does this yatra of Bharat. So there are, I mean, Janki Babake has written a brilliant book on Bhatkande and Paluskar. That's the book I had asked you to read. It's brilliant. In which she talks about these two guys creating nationalism in two different frameworks. So Paluskar wants to create Bhakti Sangeet as nationalism.
Right.
Bhatkande wants to create intellectual nationalism by saying, I'm going to create a national music in thought. Right? So these two guys, Bhatkande lost and Paluskar won. Finally, if you think of victory, if you think of it, Bhatkande didn't work. So it is about 1904 he comes to the south.
Which book is this? Janaki? Oh, okay.
And he comes to the south, he spends a lot of time. Actually, his diary is the most, I read it sometimes just for the heck of it. There's some very cute anecdotes where he goes to Tanjore, for example. So I discovered things, we talk about purity, right? So if you go to the percussion world, they always will tell you this ghatam throwing thing. So, right, he's considered cheap, by the way. So ghatam artists who used to throw the ghatam and catch it, oh, this is just some gymnastics on stage, right? Yeah. Fascinating thing is Bhatkande is the first to record that, which I found out. He goes to Tanjore and he talks about how this ghatam artist throws the ghatam and he's amazed how he catches it on the sum. He says he throws it up and he catches it on the sum. So I told my ghatam artist, if anybody tells you it's cheap, please tell him it's happening from 1904. So this idea of cheap is also the fact that anything that is physical is undignified. Right? So, I mean, you learn a lot from his diary, actually. And he traveled all over, actually.
Because I know that Ustad Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab, he used to come to Chennai,
Yeah, I mean,
worshipped.
everybody.
Yeah.
Badi Mullah Khan came much later. But then you have that rendition who Abdul Karim Khan singing, who learned from Dhanama. It's online. Go listen to it. He sings Saveri. He sings Karhara Priya. Ramani Samanam Evru. Very cutely. Sing extremely cutely. That's the word I will use. Even if it is Abdul Karim Khan. It's cute.
The question was... Oh.
I'm sure this is online and my Hindustani friends are going to go at my neck for that. So anyway. Yeah.
Then we'll do one last question. Let's gather both and we'll stop at that.
My name is Sarvesh. Thank you for the talk. I just wanted to ask, you were talking about Kamakshi versus Kamachi. So Kamachi, yes. So, it reminded me, like even my own grandmother's name is Lakshmi, but if you ask her, she'll say it's Lakshmi.
Lakshmi.
Right? So, but my mother, if you ask her what her mother-in-law's name is, she'll say Lakshmi, right? But, to them, the whole sort of the reason why some people say Lakshmi and some people say Lakshmi, I would assume it's lost on them, right? If you ask her, does it matter to you how people say your name? She'll probably say, no, it doesn't matter. So I was wondering, do you think...
Well, I'm not sure about that, but nevertheless, go ahead.
Okay.
They may not consciously respond,
right.
But like, if I can just... I'm sorry, I'm interluding from your point, but I'm saying that sometimes there's a feeling from the sound. There's comfort from a sound, right? Mm-hmm. And there is not so much comfort from another sound. It may not be so prominently felt, but I think a lot of that happens. And it may not be overtly know that this is denoting something. You may not.
Yeah.
But I think that there is a play there. I think so. Go ahead.
Yeah. My question is, do you think, is it possible to look at Lakshmi versus Lakshmi as something just, on the level of familiar versus unfamiliar and not wrong versus right?
Not wrong. Both come from social demographies. You can't dissociate them from social demographies and linguistic separations, right? So Tamil has a very distinct identity. And in that comes, so, now that we're talking about Tamil, we were talking about this whole idea of 2-language and 3-language policy that we are now battling in Tamil Nadu, right? That's the politics of the current day. So I'm using this as a peg to talk about that. So one of the things that most people who have that discussion don't realize is Tamil, in general, Tamil is grammatically and structurally so distinct from any other South Indian Dravidian language. So many words in Kannada are Sanskrit words. Many words in Telugu are, and they are Sanskrit as they are. You understand? So the word does not get transformed in Telugu into any other sonic body. In Tamil, it gets transformed. For example, I was saying Adbhutam, Adbhuta is Arpudam. Now a Tamil guy does not know Arpudam is Adbhuta. Or Lakshmi is very naturally said, right? So one of the things is, and this is also, if you go up the societal caste ladder, the more Brahminical you get, these words become easier. Because from childhood, you've heard some Sanskrit word in your head. Some shloka somewhere, right? And that habituation allows you to inhabit this space very easily. And which is why you can pick up Hindi if you want. If you come from a Brahminical community. For a full Tamil speaker, picking up a language that is based out of Sanskrit is a Herculean task. Forget about the politics of language. It's structurally so different. For example, gender and Hindi. Come on. I don't know whether the Gadi is male or Gadi is female. Maybe it depends on the Gadi. If the real Gadi is female. So in Tamil, you don't have that. You have no gender for inanimate objects.
What about tomorrow and yesterday?
Yeah, that's...
We have the same word.
I think you guys is confused, basically. So I'm just saying, this goes to, in some way, to your question, that you have to recognize the distinctness of Tamil's structuring and its social demography in that structuring. Right? You can't dissociate that from the sound. And we can hop and jump because we have the privilege of being able to hop and jump. But for most people, it's not. So in fact, it can be scary. It's the other thing. It can be very, very scary when I only use those words. Right? It can be scary. It can be like something I don't understand. So for me, my Tamil was completely Brahminical Tamil. And it took me years to shed it. And why? Because the Brahminical Tamil is not just a dialect. It is a way of establishing that you're completely unique. Please remember that you're the only community in the entire spectrum of Tamil who speak that language. So it is not just a dialect. It is an identity marker. If you take the rest of Tamil society, though dialectic differences of certain words, they all speak a Tamil that's common. We all have to agree. Whether you go to Kanyakumari, whether you go to Chengalpet, the Tamil, there's a commonality in vocabulary and grammar usages, everything. Only the Brahminical community speaks something that's so separating. So when I started speaking Tamil, I struggled. Even now I do. But I know I've progressed a lot compared to, say, 6 years ago. I can now speak for 1 hour quite comfortably. But it was very hard. So you had to, so there is a identity location to it.
Okay, no, mine was, I don't know if there's even time for a question. In India, we have this lovely thing called vote of thanks. I feel it's more time for a vote of thanks than a question. But maybe I'll ask my question as an expression of gratitude itself, that I just wanted to know a little more about the really fascinating Mridangam player and the skin, and what is the kind of knowledge that is involved in knowing something. How would you name that knowledge that is a knowledge of Ashu or Leela or me to make a skin? What is the knowledge of the Mridangam player? How would you name that knowledge? And the reason I ask also is a broader observation, which is that just as somebody has a style, actually, so that's one question. From that, the thing I'm wondering, it's been really an education, as Katyayani said, watching you think. And just as somebody has a style of singing, they also have a style of thinking. And what is particularly lovely about your style of thinking is the number of times you say, I don't know, which is not an I don't know of ignorance, because you've taken us till a certain point to which it is possible to say, I don't know. But I'm wondering is, when you say, I don't know, is it that when you're negating something, you're critical of something, you actually name it quite ferociously and call it out, give it a name. But when you're affirming something, like the Mridangam player or the maker, is it that in affirming and admiring, you pick a more modest position and say, I don't know?
I think so. I think it's respectful also.
Would you be able to name a little more what is your affirming?
I'm just going to try and respond to that. It's a difficult question. I think doubt is a very beautiful thing. Sorry? Yeah. So I think it allows you a place of two, three different things. One is respect. Okay? In the case of, say, a Mridangam maker or anything that I'm observing and I am inferring from. Okay? But it also allows you to be alive to your own interrogations. Because usually we end interrogations with a conclusion. But that's not an interrogation. Right? So for me, placing myself in that place of doubt allows the interrogation to remain. Actually, answering your question does something to my stomach. Maybe that's the best answer.
But Mridangam maker, what knowledge does he have of us?
Of what? I won't understand your question. That's what I ask you.
To make one for me, what would he know?
Oh, of you. Oh, interesting. Oh, that's what you mean. If you're going to make Mridangam for you.
Ashu.
Okay. I don't know who's better. Ashu has some bowls, so he probably is better than you. So there are many things. So the first is, say you're meeting the Mridangam maker for the first time. You don't know. So there are 2-3 different kinds of Mridangam makers. There are those that sell to shops. So Mridangam makers are smart. All the mass Mridangam will go to a shop. He doesn't care about quality and all that. Okay. So because it's for some student who's going to bang the Mridangam and then anyway spoil it. But if you're a professional, the Mridangam maker is, first of all, the Mridangam maker, you'll have to go and you'll automatically play and show. I mean, not as demonstratively, but the Mridangam maker, you will do something. So Mridangam maker has to know a few things. He must understand what you think is good sound for you. It's like comfort food. They must know your comfort sound. And they also are watching to see, for example, some people have, say, sweaty hands. Some people have dry hands. Those kind of issues, physical issues. Then some people have a stronger forefinger. Their technique, their choppers may not be as strong. Right? Now, all this, the maker is not going to articulate you like I'm articulating. He just knows. Right? From what they told me, I'm trying to break it down to some kind of an academic activity. Right? So they know all this. Similarly, the left side of the mridangam. Right? So that's the bass end. Now, the bass end is played in 2-3 different techniques. Depending on that, you will have to choose. So you have 3 parts of the mridangam, 4 parts technically. You have the wood, which is cylinder, usually jackfruit tree. Then you have the right and the left. The high end has 3 skins. Okay, so it has a base, which is more a support. It has cow skin this side, and the center is placed from below. A hole is cut in the cow skin. From below, you have goat skin, on which you have that black spot that you see, which is made of a volcanic rock, which is mixed with boiled rice and applied in little balls in circular fashions for hours. Okay. Now, how much of that black spot to put there depends on what sound you want. How much of that mouth to cut depends on your hand. If your hand is a short hand, the amount I'll cut is different. If it's a bigger hand, I will cut differently. If you open up that, the sound sometimes becomes sharper. Do you want a sharper sound? I can just go on. And then there is a third part where the tension is held by ropes. Now, of course, you have other things that have come up, but usually you have ropes. It used to be buffalo skin ropes, but now it's also, they use a kind of what's known as parachute wire. It actually came from parachutes. Somebody figured that's easier to use. So they use that kind of a string to tie the 2 sides. The left side has 2 skins. It has buffalo and cow and goat, sorry. Now there also, so the technique of playing, so all this and usually takes time, which is why a maker and a player have relationships over a decade, 2 decades. To shift from one maker to another, this player will think 100 times. Usually what he will do is he'll give one testing mridangam. Is it coming the way I want it? Right? So I'll finish with an anecdote, this whole thing. So there's a famous anecdote. The great Palgat Manir, one of the greatest mridangists that have ever played the mridangam. And he had a mridangam maker by name Parland. Okay? And they had a very, very dynamic relationship, and Manir just depended on Parland to make his mridangam. Okay? And there, the whole complexity of the relationship comes. It's actually quite a fascinating. In my book, I end the book with discussing what is that relationship. So I end the book. And you have this when he makes mridangam. And there's another great mridangam player by name Parni Subramanya Pillai. Parni Subramanya Pillai and Palgat Manir are the 2 main superstars, of course, competing for space, for intellectual activity, grandiose, everything, right? Now, Parni was known for incredible left hand, bass hand. So even in a recording now, you will hear his left, with a single multi-directional mic, you will hear the left going boom. So Manir always wanted a left like that. Parland was making mridangam for both of them. Right? So Manir calls Parland, said, you have to make a mridangam and my left must be like his left. So Parland said, okay, I'll try. So he made one. He said, no, it's not right. Do it again. 2, 3, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. By the end, Parland is tired, sick and tired of this thing. Because every time he makes a mridangam, Manir said, no, it's still not like how Parni has it. So story goes, after a few months, Parland told Manir, it's not about the skin, it's about the hand. That probably answers your question.
One shouldn't speak after Krishna. And also after Honam, but one should keep playing them again and again. Anyway, I don't have to speak for very long. I only have to, and I would like to place my vote of thanks at the end of T.M. Krishna's 2 weeks of residency as an artist at our center. And since I'm not a musician nor a musicologist, I cannot even construct a musical tribute. I am a political scientist who's interested in humanities in general and music in particular. So my tribute and thanks would take the following form. I think we heard, watched, and witnessed an arresting synthesis of the aesthetic and the intellectual. This is my summary of what happened in the last 2 weeks. Krishna not only moved us with his art, but also explained conceptually what it was all about, what its merits and demerits and strengths and weaknesses are. But most importantly for me, as far as the intellectual side goes, he showed how to make art inclusive, how to step beyond the tradition in which he's anchored and embrace surrounding traditions. In my tribute to him the other day at dinner, I said he is a rooted cosmopolitan, and we can also use the term rooted inclusiveness, not simply rooted deeply in Karnatic tradition, but very embracing of what is artistically beautiful around him, around the tradition. So thank you, Krishna, for lifting us up, for giving us so much to think about, and for gracing us with your warm and most thoughtful presence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.